Hello, everyone. This is John Brassard Jr., the Kitchen Table Historian. Today's podcast marks a special milestone for me. As of just a few days ago, I reached my 1-year anniversary of the podcast. I've had a lot of fun, and I sincerely hope that you have too. I've learned a lot over the past year, too. When I first started doing this, I honestly didn't have a clue how to do much of anything. I was feeling along blindly as I went. Sometimes things worked out, and sometimes they didn't. Thanks to some feedback along the way, both positive and, negative, I got better. And now, here we are today, still in the early days of a new decade. I would like to thank each and every one of you for listening, for reading, for telling me what you think. Without all of you, none of this would have ever been possible. In honor of my first podcast anniversary, I'm going to tell you a story that I was originally told when I was just a kid. It's one of my favorites, and I have no doubt that you'll enjoy it as much as I always have. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please like, subscribe, recommend, or write a review. Better yet, tell a friend about us here. We always have more room at the table. And now, without further ado, is the story that you've come for. Some people just don't know when to quit. Granted, that's a trait that we normally admire. The sports team that keeps pushing to a win when their score is way down during a game. The guy that's not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer who keeps trying and studying hard to eventually earn their high school or college diploma. These are inspirational examples. We cling to them, hold them close to our hearts. They give us hope. Because if so-and-so can do such and such, then we can surely accomplish our comparatively piddly little goal. But sometimes, people should just quit while they're ahead. We have no reason to suspect that Harry Hamilton was a bad police officer. He spent several successful years in the Davenport Police Department in eastern Iowa, even earning high praise and a newspaper write-up when he stopped a teenage pickpocket. For whatever reason, being a good, honest cop wasn't enough for him. He must have wanted something more, something that maybe offered better money or prestige. To achieve his goals, he quit the police force and became an editor for the Rock Island News in the nearby city of Rock Island, Illinois. The Rock Island News was a notorious paper. More than what some would colorfully refer to as a scandal rag, the news deliberately and maliciously aimed to spread lies and deliberately destroy reputations. The paper was founded and run by John Looney, the premier crime kingpin of the region during the earliest few decades of the 20th century. While his initial goal was to slander the reputation of another local paper in retaliation for a perceived personal slight against him, Looney quickly learned that the news could effectively be used to blackmail anyone with money. To do that, he or one of his associates would write up a sample story that revealed details of alleged activities of a given someone. It didn't matter if what was said was true at all. What mattered is that people would believe the accusations against the person in the write-up, ruining their reputations. Everything was all set to print, unless, of course, Looney and the news could be persuaded to keep things off of the headlines. For a small fee, all troubles were wiped miraculously away. This was the environment that Harry Hamilton was employed in. His boss was a man named Dan Drost, who was Looney's chief lieutenant in all of his illegal operations. Harry was well aware of the activities that these men were engaged in. For his part, he actively participated in publishing articles that he knew weren't true. Hamilton's luck finally ran out, and he was arrested for libel. He was sent to jail, insisting all the while that he wasn't going to talk. Eventually, however, turning state's evidence against his fellow criminals became more appealing than a life behind bars. After being released, Hamilton returned to Davenport. For someone who apparently disliked being in jail as much as he didn't make any qualms about involving himself in criminal activity again. This time, he was arrested for burglary and returned to prison in 1920. By late 1921, Hamilton had once again been released. Taking up residence in Davenport, he was determined to make a fresh start of things. He told people that he was going to go straight. Nope, no prison life for him anymore. He was going to be straight as an arrow and be a contributing member of society. No more crime, no more bars on the windows. The problem was that the city was having some economic problems of its own, which meant that jobs in Davenport were a little thin on the ground. Of course, being a known criminal who had spent time in jail probably wasn't helping him win over a new employer either. I'd like to say that Hamilton gave things the good college try and exhausted every lead. We won't ever know that. What we do know is that he finally threw in the towel and decided that he was going to rob a bank. To help his cause, Hamilton enlisted the help of a man named Roy Purple. A local barber who liked to hang out with hardened criminals, Purple was seemingly eager to join in. They decided that their target would be the Stockman Savings Bank in Long Grove, Iowa, about 20 minutes north of Davenport. Long Grove was primarily an agricultural area surrounded by miles of farmland. The would-be robbers might have figured that because there wasn't a police force and the citizens of the quiet town wouldn't be used to the outbreak of sudden violence, then they might not put up as much resistance. Or they might have thought that there wouldn't be as high a chance of being recognized by someone who knew them. Whatever their reasons, they had chosen their spot and began to plan. They bought a big, fast car called a Hudson 6 to help them get away faster. They got guns and a small black bag for carrying the money in. They knew the route they would take to and from the bank. Hamilton and Purple were as ready as they were going to get. It was time. The morning of December 15th, 1921, was just another winter morning in Long Grove, Iowa. The business district at the center of the small town was humming with activity as people went about their normal business. People made their way along the streets, maybe stopping in for a haircut or a little gossip at the barber shop. Some went to the blacksmith shop to request work or went into the pool hall for a little entertainment. When the big car came roaring up the main road, it certainly got everyone's attention. Several watched as it braked hard in front of the Stockman Savings Bank, and two men came rushing out. They wore handkerchiefs over the lower half of their faces, concealing their features. With guns in their hands, they ran up the stairs leading to the bank's door. One of them grabbed the knob, turned it, and nothing. They tried it again. Still nothing. The door was locked. They tried again, desperately trying to open the door. Still nothing. The door wouldn't budge. The two men, Hamilton and Purple, looked at each other in confusion and frustration, trying to figure out what to do. This hadn't been part of the plan. It was the middle of the day, for crying out loud. Why wasn't someone there? Door should be open. But it wasn't. After failing to come up with any good answers, they went back to their car and quickly drove down the road and out of town. People immediately started talking about what they'd seen, and it wasn't good. Two strange men with guns and wearing masks trying to get into the bank could only mean one thing: robbers. Word spread fast. One especially energetic young man took it upon himself to run all the way around the town, telling everyone that he saw about the masked men at the bank. When E.A. Anschultz, a local grain dealer, heard the news, he couldn't believe it. People may have thought that it was a robbery, but there was no way that it could have been. It was all a big mistake. Anschultz began to make his way toward the bank. He was friends with the bank president, R.K. Brownlee. Surely he'd know what all this nonsense was about. After talking with Brownlee, however, Anschultz quickly discovered that his assumption had been wrong. Brownlee and the bank bookkeeper, a young woman in her early 20s named Jean Marty, had been out to lunch when the men had tried to get in. The two bank workers had no idea what had happened and were just as surprised as anyone else. Al Clint, a blacksmith and mechanic whose garage was directly across the street, had also stopped in to talk to Brownlee. Clint needed to know exactly what happened. After all, he was a vigilante, and it was his job to know. Okay, to be clear, he's not Batman, nor did he think he was some kind of superhero. You see, starting at about 1920, banks in Iowa experienced a rash of robberies and burglaries all across the state. The Iowa Banking Association, the dominant banking organization there, was determined to bring it to an end. The Banking Association itself used the services of the Burns Detective Agency. In the late 19th century, Burns was able to handle all criminal investigations themselves, which included everything from forgeries to burglaries. As the population of Iowa grew over the next few decades, however, it became harder and harder for them to handle each and every crime. The wave of robberies in 1920 drove that point home. To complicate things further, the association couldn't always rely on law enforcement to protect their assets. Many rural towns didn't have a police force of their own and were often some distance away from larger urban areas which did have them. Even a local sheriff might take a good amount of time to respond, depending on how fast they received the news and how good the roads were. After some deliberation, the association came up with a solution. They discussed it with the state, and soon after, the vigilance commissions were born. The way they worked was simple. For every bank that was a member of the Iowa Banking Association, at least 4 locals could volunteer to become a member of the Vigilance Commission, or vigilante for short. Each of these volunteers would then be officially deputized by the local sheriff and provided arms and ammunition for the express purpose of preventing burglaries and robberies at the bank, up to and including the use of deadly force. The vigilance commissions, or vigilantes, would handle burglaries and robberies themselves. As locals, they were right in the area of the member banks, which minimized response times. By making them official deputies, it put the full power of the law behind them. These changes also took that responsibility away from Burns, allowing them to focus on frauds and forgeries. Although they hadn't been in operation for very long, the commissions became very popular. Young and old, volunteers stepped forward to help stand watch over their local banks. Volunteers like Al Clint. As Clint and his companion stood inside the bank, Gene Marty saw the robber's car drive past one of the large picture windows. The car had been seen driving around the area since it had left earlier, and now the robbers had returned. Once again, the 2 men parked the car and ran up to the door. This time, they were able to go directly inside. As they came in, Anschultz and Clint simply walked out past them. For unknown reasons, the robbers didn't stop them and allowed them to pass unhindered out the door. Instead, the robbers turned their attention to Marty and Brownlee. They pushed the bank employees into the office and began striking Brownlee, in his 70s at the time, in the head with their guns. Shouting, the robbers demanded him to tell them where all the money was at, while stopping periodically to comfort the frightened Marty, telling her that everything was going to be all right. One robber left and began to dump money into a black bag that they had brought with them. After a while, the other robber herded Marty and Brownlee into the vault. Hamilton and Purple demanded to know if the bank employees knew them. After receiving their assurance that they didn't, the robbers started to close the vault door with the intention of locking the employees inside. Desperately, the president and the bookkeeper begged them not to. They explained that the vault had a time lock, and that once the door had been shut, then it could only be opened again when the correct combination was entered at the right time of day. There was a very good chance that they would suffocate long before anyone was able to do that. Hamilton and Purple relented, settling for locking them behind an inner gate instead. Their heist now complete, the 2 made their way toward the door. Purple, with the bag firmly in hand, went first. As he stepped out onto the stairs, he suddenly stopped, staring at something. There, down the road, was a man behind a telephone pole, holding a gun. The barber could have gone back inside or just decided to try and run to the car. Instead, in a slow-motion minute that changed his fate, Purple raised his gun and started shooting. The world outside exploded with the sound of gunfire. Purple took the stone steps down as fast as he could, breaking to a run as soon as he hit flat ground. After a few steps, he felt a searing, white-hot pain in his chest, and then nothing. He felt himself falling, almost like floating through deep water. By the time his body hit the cold, hard concrete, Roy Purple had already drifted away. To Hamilton, the gunfire must have seemed to come from everywhere. If he wanted to escape, he had no choice but to run into the middle of it. Bracing himself, Hamilton followed his partner out the door. He raised his gun, firing it where he thought the shots might be coming from. Desperately, he ran toward his car. As he went, several shots hit him, but he didn't stop. The robber made it to the driver's side door and jumped inside. He jammed his foot down on the accelerator, but nothing happened. The men had left their car running so that they could have a quick getaway, but the car was like a stone. When the vigilantes noticed that the robber wasn't shooting at them anymore, they quickly made their way up to his car. With guns in hand, they stood outside and told the robber to give up his gun. He asked them what gun they were talking about. The vigilantes reached into the car, pulled him out of the sidewalk, and handcuffed him. Roy Purple was dead, shot through the heart only a few steps outside of the bank. The vigilantes, being thorough men, hog-tied his body and left it on the cold ground, lying next to the bag of money that had cost him his life. A short time later, the sheriff, Bill Bremer, arrived with the coroner and some policemen. They had been called about the robbery when the two men had gone into the bank. At the same time, others were also moving into action. The Vigilance Commission members in Long Grove had armed themselves and taken up different shooting positions around the bank, including Al Clint and E.A. Anschultz. A garage worker named Archie Henn had walked across to the robber's car and simply shut off the engine. When Purple had come out of the bank, he had seen an armed vigilante hiding behind a telephone pole and began shooting. He never stood a chance. The other vigilantes returned fire, killing him. The coroner, upon seeing that the second robber was still alive, ordered that his handcuffs be removed and that he be taken somewhere he could be examined. The robber was carried into the pool hall across the street and laid on one of the tables. An ambulance was called for him, and he was taken to Mercy Hospital in Davenport. While uncooperative at first, he soon confessed to everything. 4 days after the robbery, Hamilton died from his wounds. The Vigilance Commission had done its work. The robbery was prevented, and all but 10 cents of the stolen money was recovered. The vigilantes and other individuals involved were given a $1,000 reward by the Iowa Bankers Association to be split among them. Things went back to normal after that. The Vigilance Commission peaked in popularity, then was phased out by law enforcement. The vigilantes themselves went back to their lives, their duties performed and completed. They had done what they had volunteered to do. The men and women who were there that day never forgot what happened. The story was told and retold by locals, each telling relating how simple folks stood up against 2 bank robbers and had won the day. It passed from generation to generation, eventually passing from quaint story to local legend. If you're ever passing through Long Grove, the bank building is still there on the corner of the former downtown. If you look carefully at the brickwork under the large picture window near the doorway, you can still see bullet holes etched like scars into the edifice. When you look at them, spare a thought for Harry Hamilton and Roy Purple, 2 would-be bank robbers who would have been better off quitting while they were ahead. You have been listening to John Brasser Jr., the Kitchen Table Historian. I thank you all for coming out this week, and I sincerely hope that you'll make your way back next time to hear another strange tale that your grandma didn't want you to hear. This podcast was written and performed by yours truly, with the title music performed by Bo Moonlight and additional music provided by Audio Blocks. Until next time, remember that no matter how calm things seem in the Midwest, there's always someone out there making things just a little weirder.